What is up, you guys? Welcome to another video of how to engineer. I decided to make this video because a lot of people seem to have problems with getting into engineering or supporting as a whole, because engineering or supporting in this game has such a big impact on the gameplay of yourself and others that it's become a pretty important aspect of the game. Now, because we in particular have a shortage of engineer players or supporting players, I figured I'd make a guide on how to play it so that new players have some kind of guide um, on how to start with their class as a whole. Because a lot of people are daunted by the class because they say it has a lot of buttons, it has a lot of inputs, it has a lot of abilities that they're not sure about, what to use, when to use, and so on and forth. So I decided maybe I can make a guide so people get less scared about it, and maybe more people are gonna jump to the class that way. Another good future side for you is that engineer is going to be really strong in the upcoming patch 11.1. Now, everything I'm going to be telling you now won't be applicable to the future patch then, because so many changes will happen. We'll get a full stat overhaul on top of that, so nothing of that will really matter. But the class itself, engineer, is going to be really strong. DPS wise, it's supposed to be one of the top DPSs, and supporting is still as necessary as it is now. Now, Bard can support as well, but not as efficient and not as fast as an engineer can. So Bard is kind of the fat brother that gets the job done as well, but not as good as the nimble younger brother, which is the engineer. So today about engineering, I'll be going over my build that I run, why I have what at certain ranks, and then after that I'm going to show you some gameplay examples where you can use certain abilities and why it's important to have these abilities. And after that, that's pretty much it, I guess. If you have any more questions after the video, please put them down in the comments below. I'm checking really daily often on everything, even though the channel is very inactive and we don't have a lot of followers and subscribers and all of that. I still think it's still important to maintain a good content creation for the game, because it's an awesome game. It needs more people, and to get more people you also need more content creators that spread the word out there about the game. I know it's an old game, but still it's great to play nonetheless. So jumping to the build, as you can see here, we're going to focus in this video particular. I'll make more in the future for other aspects, but this is purely for PVE support. So it's the most basic, it's the startup guild build. It's what people are gonna need to have when they start engineering, because they need to start gearing up on PVE. So they need to learn the basics of engineering as well, which can be done on PVE very easily. So what I focus on is supporting, so buffing and shielding your party. You'll be focusing on doing damage so that you can keep yourself alive. Mostly on heroics, because of the damage you take. You still need to self-heal yourself with damage. And then with crowd control, so interrupting, which is a very important aspect of the gameplay of the engineer. But more on that later. So first, as you can see, we have the acid shots and the toxic volley on max rank, because that way you do the most damage. This is one of your main abilities, your main damaging abilities, together with acid turret. So you get these to maximum first, and you'll be using only toxic volley because the damage is so much better than this. It's literally double actually. It jumps to double, 15,000 to 33,000. That's an amazing big damage jump you get there. Now we have this on rank 1 because you can't lower it. I wouldn't even use it at all. You're using mana burst of mana. But you have it rank 1 because the game forces you to have it at least rank 1. Light turret, we don't really use this one because it's the difference between light turret and acid turret is that acid turret does more damage. It's also natural damage, which is what an engineer is based on. So you can use the stat natural damage. And it's also an AoE on impact. And the light turret isn't an AoE on impact, so it's purely profitable to take acid. Next layer we go for acid bump. Now we have acid bump to do some DOT damage, but more importantly is to get that 200 heat up really quick, 200 cooling in this case. Now you can say the same, we might even take this rank 1 and the frag bump rank 1, but I wouldn't use this because you're not gonna benefit the DPS as much as you would by using another volley. And this is because it's using a global cooldown, which means that instead of using this bomb, you could have used a better ability that does more damage. Now it does raise your heat to the maximum, but you might fuck up a lot of times there with your generator when you use the ability and you have some cooling already in your reactor. You're gonna fuck up that value, and you can't do anything with 200 heat because you have no other abilities to heat your reactor. You're always cooling down. When you're doing natural damage on a support, on an engineer, you're always cooling down your reactor. When you're doing physical damage, you're heating up your reactor. We're not using anything in this build that is heating up the reactor, so you always work with cooling. That's why I prefer not to take frag bomb to prevent mistakes, because those mistakes will lead you to downtime of your buffs, and you don't want that to happen because then you're not buffing your party. Next ability is Medical Emergency. It's a very important ability. It's one of your top abilities that's going to be spammed all of the time. It's Medical Emergency. Now the ability itself is very little. It's just needed to get for the Ruby called Extraction, which is a mass purity for your whole party. Very important to have. I have it rank 3 so that the cooldown is as little as possible. I have Shocker rank 1. I think rank 1 is enough because it's only reducing the cooldown, and you'll have enough cooldown to use it on almost every pack once. Now you might want to get this up when you're speedrunning, when you see that your packs are really mowing down really quick, then you might want to switch to higher rank. But for now, I've been using rank 1 for a while now and I haven't seen any trouble. I haven't seen any situation where I thought, fuck, I needed those 7 seconds before my shocker. Then Toxic Volley, as we discussed. Now, Burst of Mana, why we use Burst of Mana instead of Reactor Blowdown? Burst of Mana is going to be used because when you're using the Unity Triquim, which is this artifact for supporting, you see on level 5, it's dealing area damage applies the United in Death effect. So dealing area damage, that's exactly what this ability is. This is an AoE. It applies the death of United in Death effect to victims, which increases AoE damage they take from all sources by 1% up to 10% for 4 seconds. So what happens is that as long as you spam this, and then together with your acid turrets, which are also an AoE, you're going to build up some kind of stack. I'm gonna show you guys here. As you see here, this United in Death, and that's increasing the AoE damage that the monsters will take. It stacks up to 10 stacks, and then everything that has this debuff takes 10% more damage from your party. Easy. So next to that we have Aspect of Assault, obviously because we're supporting, we're not taking this. Then our offensive buff is Valiance. Valiance increases the stats that is the highest at the time of base stats by a lot. So if you can see, my highest right now is Brutality. So when I pop Valiance, it buffs my Brutality by a ton. It's about 470, I guess. It's very important to have this up all the time. So what you do is you do 2 attacks, 2 volleys. You see that the reactor is heating up. When you do your reactor mana burst, it's going to reapply the Valiance buff, given that this tactics Valiance is active. So as you can see, my Valiance here refreshes every time I use this buff, every time I use this attack. And this is refreshing because of a Ruby here called Circulation. Now there's another Ruby that is going to make sure that our defensive buff also refreshes, which is Bloodthirst. I don't have it tracking because it's not as important for me, but as you see here, Bloodthirst refreshes itself every time I use the mana burst. And that is because of this Ruby, Barrage Fire. Very important as a support to have these 2 rubies, so that you're rebuffing both of these abilities every time you use mana burst. Now one misconception I see from a lot of engineers and a lot of supports is that they always tell you 2 volleys and then burst of mana, 2 volleys and then a burst of mana. I'm gonna say it, I'm gonna tell you differently. I'm using 3 or 4 at most before I use Burst of Mana. This is because the Bloodlust buff will expire, so you won't have 100% uptime on the Bloodlust Burst. But you're not supposed to have this up all the time, because every time you use it once, which is whenever you use it, your party is gonna have a 4 seconds buff, 4 second Bloodthirst, in which they have plenty of time to heal themselves up with damage. Which usually is the case, that's enough for them to heal up. Now, as you can see, meanwhile, on the Valiance buff, when you're using 2 attacks and then Burst of Mana, you see that it's already using only half the time before it runs down. So that means you have more time basically to do your shots before using Mana Burst. Because when we look at the damage you're dealing, you see here that Toxic Volley does quite a lot of damage. Now obviously this is a bad perspective because we're not actually in combat and you can't compare with everything else. But I'll tell you right now that I know for sure that your Toxic Volley is on top together with your Acid Turrets, because that's what does the most damage in your whole arsenal. So because you want to push more Toxic Volleys out there, because that's a lot of damage, I'm using 3 Toxic Volleys every time, every rotation. You see here that it's still, you still have about 2 seconds left before it runs out, yeah? So that means you can actually go up to 4, but depending on the global cooldowns you have. I'm gonna tell that it's about 4 global cooldowns that you have time before you have to do Burst of Mana to reapply the Valiance effect. 4 global cooldowns means 4 abilities that are on your global cooldown that you can use. Why I'm telling you this is that because while you're doing all of this, you're also gonna buff your party. Now some buffs that you're gonna use a lot is Master Plan, and that is on your global cooldown. So that means that when you have a rotation where you use Master Plan included, you'll only use 3 volleys. So I'm gonna show you here. So we have the buff 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is when you have to do Burst of Mana before the Valiance buff expires. So basically you can do 4 shots every rotation before you reapply Valiance. But when you're using Master Plan, you see that this also goes on cooldown. That means you're losing a opportunity to use Toxic Volley. So that means logically you can only use 3 Toxic Volleys before you have to do Burst of Mana again in order for you not to lose Valiance. I hope you can follow in this, because that's an important part of the gameplay. 1, 2, 3, 4, Burst of Mana. 1, 2, 3, 4, Burst of Mana. As you can see, Valiance is up all the time with 4 shots. So you have 4 global cooldowns to spend before you have to do Burst of Mana. And this is also where Acid Bomb comes in. Is that, for example, when you have the buff active, so you have your tactics. For people that are confused right now, you get the tactics when you're using your Valiance and your Bloodthirst buff. Now just using these buffs applies the Valiance and Bloodthirst for only several seconds, but the tactics is what allows you to repeat your buffs when you're using Burst of Mana. If you don't have your tactics up, it's not going to refresh this. I thought I'd point you this out because it might be an interesting information. So when you're using whatever you're doing and it gets quite busy, quite chaotic in the combat, and you see yourself losing track to keep your buffs up, this is why you have Frag Bomb when you're using a lot of abilities at the same time. For example, when I'm using destructive shots, it's giving you this cast time where you can't refresh this, but in order to keep up with this, I'm using my Frag Bomb. Using Frag Bomb right after destructive shots does reapply the Valiance effect as well, but only Valiance, not Bloodthirst. Because of this Ruby, here we go, Chemical Agents. So the damage of the bombs increase, which is good, but using any offensive support ability, which is a bomb, it's an offensive ability, grants you the corresponding tactics effect for 15 seconds, which is the tactics from Valiance. While this effect is active, your Frag Bomb and Acid Bomb once again apply the support effect to your party members, which is the Valiance effect, because we're using Valiance. Now, in the game, they're talking about support effects because you have Valiance for offensive or Power for offensive. Now, in this build, we're using Valiance because that's the best one there was for PVE. Now, I can't believe it might change to Power at some point, probably in the Fable patch, because this is a percentage-based buff. This is a fixed stat buff. That means the values they give are different. So, for example, when we're in Green patch, the stats we get is a lot less. That means that the modifier of percentage is way less valuable than the power you get from giving 400 stats on top. So obviously when you're in green patch, Valiance is way more effective because it's giving you more stats than the power gives you percentage wise based on the stats you have in green. To give you a simple explanation, when you have a full green set and you have 100 stats, then power gives you 5% more, as you can see here. 5% of that 100 is 20 stats. It's 5 stats, wow, math. It's 5 stats. So power would give you 5 stats, while Valiance gives you 400 stats. So when you're comparing these two buffs, you can obviously see that Valiance is way better option. But when we're going to the Fable or Relic patch, where people have a lot more stats, then power's percentage buff gets more valuable than Valiance at some point. And that is when you should switch from Valiance to power. Now the essence in the gameplay is the same, you're just going to give it your party and yourself a different buff. That's really important to know when you're playing Engineer for a long time, that you might have to switch your buffs as the seasons, as the patches go on. So back to the buffing, when you just use Valiance and you're giving combat and you're just starting to burst with destructive shots, you'll see that you won't be able to build up your heat with it. So when you do bump right after, it refreshes it. That way you can keep it up. Another thing that you can do is also when you're bursting, use the bump right after, like right at the beginning. Destructive shots right after that, and as long as you use an ability, your reactor is not going to lose the cooling. So right after the reactor, right after destructive shots, you can use mana burst again because your reactor will be full, so that you refresh the buff again. That is why bomb is an important part of your build, to combine it with destructive shots often, very often. Another way to use it is when you're panicking or you have to do a lot of CCs during combat, which obviously use global cooldowns as well, so that you can use a bomb to keep your buffs up. That's for that. That's about Valiance. Then support aspect, very necessary. Without this, your build just doesn't exist. Rank 3 is recommended. Paralyzing Ray rank 1. I have it rank 1 because I see that's enough. If you're playing free to play and you have extra stats from cash up, feel free to push it to rank 2. It's only gonna give you less cooldown, but right now I have 17 seconds cooldown, which I think is the most I get for PVE. Yeah, that's about right. So 17 seconds cooldown to use in between packs is fine. Now it does happen that you might paralyze Ray the wrong mob, then I'm usually using my goldfish to apply long CC as well on the correct mob, and I'm sure free to play has the same thing. Yeah, that's just it. It's just a long CC, which might be necessary for gameplay. Then you have concentrate, which is also very important. Concentrate, as you can see in the description, isn't that much of a buff or ability, but the important thing is that it removes one random positive effect. Now that means it's a dispeller. You're basically removing positive effects, maybe buffs, shields, bursts from the enemy, either PvE or PvP, but it's PvE build, so we're gonna stick to PvE. There are certain monsters in heroics that are buffing themselves, and that's important for you as an engineer to debuff it. Very important, for example, is that the dragon in Phineas Cloister is buffing himself up over time during combat. The engineer has to keep using concentrate to remove those stacks, otherwise the tank is taking too much damage and will die. Yeah, that's that. There's also an AoE version of this, but we'll get to that. Oh well, I can show it right now. It's in the first grid. Flying fractions. This is the same thing as concentrate, but then an AoE version. So very important to have as well, in my opinion. Now in heroics, you can only use it on 2 packs, which might be even debatable if you should use it there. But I have it nonetheless because that's what I got used to as playing an engineer. If you play without it, it's fine. If you know what you're doing, then that's fine. Then you shouldn't even be watching this guide. But as somebody that starts with engineering, please just try to take these and play with it, because that's what I did as well, and I turned out just fine. When we move on, so Bloodthirst is the one that gives your party Bloodless buff so that they heal up from the damage they deal. It gives quite a lot of Bloodless, so that's why I'm saying again, You don't have to have this buff up all the time. It's just going to give it quite enough whenever you use burst of mana. And then the next thing is we have acid turrets, which deal quite some amount of damage every time they shoot. Now they completely fire themselves. They fire on whatever is nearest to them. If you have the Ruby, which I would recommend you to have heat signature, they're going to follow the target that you did the last reactor blowdown attack on. So that means, I guess, burst of mana is not applying this, and that's where I found a mistake in my build. So considering you use burst of mana, don't take this Ruby. So I guess I'll change this really quickly. It only works for reactor blowdown, so I assume if you want to point your turrets at a certain target, if you use reactor blowdown, it's going to mark that target, so the turrets focus that monster in particular. It might be useful for heroics, especially when you want to avoid AoE. But when we try to avoid AoEing something at all, I'm not using my turrets so that I can't fuck up at any cost. The next ability is Power Field. Now Power Field only slows down your enemies, which is quite useful already in heroics, but the most important part of this ability is also Rubies related again, this gravity anomaly. And this is reducing all the damage that everybody in the shield takes by 40%, and that's lasting for 6 seconds. Now the OP thing about this is that it's 6 seconds, and it refreshes itself another 6 seconds when it expires. So that means that I'm using it here. You see that I have the buff here, and it's running out to 1, and it's going to refresh itself when it disappears, completely chaining it, which is really good. That's a 12-second duration, 40% less damage taken. That is really good. Now another thing about this is that we can reload to reset cooldown and chain it again for 24 seconds, 40% mitigation. That is insane. So just know that you can do this. Now reload is an ability you get from Rubies as well, called reload. Reload resets all cooldowns of all devices in your arsenal, except Colossus and Portable Artillery. That means Sanatorium now, which are your tier skills. But everything else that's a device resets itself. Now what are devices? It's your acid turret, it's your medical emergency, which is also double, basically, but double medical, which is your power field for the defensive buff, which is your spider suppressor, which is, I'm gonna talk to this about in a second. This is very important, a very good buff as well. And it's also your steel trap. Now steel trap is just an ability that you use to pull mobs together to the main target you had, which is useful. Then when you press reload, all of those abilities reset themselves, all of them. Every single device that's on cooldown, you press reload, is ready for use, which is amazing. That's one of the main things why Engineer is so strong. Now another important part while we're talking about cooldowns is that Martyr's ability, Martyr's Guidance, reduces all cooldowns and race abilities, which means ratios, by 20%. So this is the best thing to use after you've used reload. And after reload you use all the devices, then it's best to use Martyr's Guidance, because that's how you get most abilities, reducing the cooldown of most abilities. That's what I want to say. So that's about cooldowns and reloads. Power field. Now I have Courage rank 1 because it's to reduce control effects. I know a lot of people use this for PvP. Now there are some bosses where you want to prevent getting stunned for yourself and the party. And on grid 2 we have this ability called Encouraging Search. Now I have it rank 2, so whenever I'm using Courage, I'm getting a 5 seconds buff that is protecting against control effects. It also says can be dispelled, but this is never gonna happen in PvE. So you have a 5 seconds immunity to CC for your whole party when you use Courage. Now people are saying you only need rank 1. That is true. It's fine with rank 1 if you know exactly what you're doing, if you know exactly when the boss does what. But I'm using this and only this in only one boss fight, and that is the that woman, the third boss in Phineas Cluster with the dragon with her, and that you're avoiding the dragon. I forgot the name right now, it slipped my mind, but that is important to have because at 25% she's always applying an AoE stun to the whole party. So around 30%, 29, I'm popping my courage to prevent my party from getting the stun, and then I switch back to Bloodlust whenever it's up. It's very helpful. I recommend you to have this exactly for this pack, exactly for that boss. Now there might be more situations where it's useful for you, but that's the main thing that I have it for. Then Iron Curtain, one of your best self-defense is 60% mitigation whenever you use it. And the awesome thing is that with the Ruby, you're applying it to your party as well, but it only reduces the mitigation on your party by 30%. Now, I'm not sure what Ruby does it. Oh yeah, here. So all group members gain the Iron Curtain effect for 6 seconds, but their incoming damage is reduced only by 30%. Another good thing is that the cooldown reduces by another 30%, so the cooldown is also less with that Ruby. So that is that. Iron Curtain, very good. Try to only use it for yourself. Try to prioritize Battlefield for your party. That's what I always go with. Now I have Temporal Acceleration. This is a speed buff that I use. There are situations where you wanna have your party move faster, but I would usually stick on Bloodlust when you have to. I'm using Temporal Acceleration sometimes when I see that my tank has to kite, or there's a situation where something fucked up and people need to kite or run, or we need to reset something. I have Temporal Acceleration for that purpose. Then Spider Suppressor, which is the best crowd control effect an engineer has in his arsenal. Now it's quite a description. Now the main thing is that when you use the spider, it runs to where your mouse cursor is. Now when I have my marker cursor as far as possible, it's gonna run all the way until there, until the max range has been reached from the ability, and the spider will die. Now it says in the description it explodes, but I never really seen it happen. When the spider reaches destination, it self-destructs. Kind of useless description there to me. It just disappears like anything else. They could also say it for Acid Turret. When it reaches its timer, it self-destructs. You don't see any difference of it. Now the good thing again about this Spider Suppressor is when you press reload, it refreshes itself. Now Spider Suppressor is really good because it's doing a mass CC crowd effect that applies the fear. Now it does, as you saw, it does snare, but it doesn't matter because on heroics, well, it matters if you snare on heroics because you're killing your party that way. But because they're feared for the same duration, nothing really happens in the end. So this is really good. An AoE CC. It's also one that lasts quite a bit. Very good. I have it rank 3 because the cooldown is low. That's it that way. Yeah. Nothing more to say. Spider Suppressor is really good. Very useful. You'll use it quite often on certain packs. No comment on that. Then I have Colossus to push my damage on boss fights. It's very good. Colossus gives a lot of damage. It's amazing how much damage it's doing actually. Let me show you here. So when we're buffing, and I'm using Master Plan, Critical Mass to have all my buffs up, and then I drop Colossus. Now watch the DPS meter go. Now I'm saying that I'm popping Master Plan and Critical Mass before I drop it, because when you have the buffs active on yourself, that means you also have those stats increased. And then when that happens and you drop Colossus, Colossus will inherit your stats on the moment of spawning. That means that the more buffs you have at the time, the stronger he'll be. That also means that when you're using it on boss fights, you preferably want to use it on when your trinket procs, when you have this trinket active and you pop the offensive ability. Now as you can see that my Colossus was doing a lot of damage actually. It was on top damage, so it's pulling your DPS up quite a bit. And then we have Red Alert, which is very useful, one of the best tier abilities an engineer can have. Now I would prioritize Red Alert over Colossus because in the end it's going to give you more damage because your party is going to get buffed from it as well. I only use my Colossus when my Red Alert is on cooldown. So Red Alert, what it does, it's going to drop an AoE in a huge area, and it's going to buff all your your party basically with damage. So as you can see, this is stacking up the longer you stay in this area. Per stack, their damage is increasing by 2%, I think. 1%. It's increasing by 1% per stack up to 15 stacks, so 15% damage increase. And then yeah, there's a last 6 seconds before it expires. Now the OP thing about this is that when you have 2 engineers, 1 DPS and 1 support, you can chain this. So you can have a fuck ton duration of 15% damage increase for the whole party, which is really insane. That's really good. But yeah, so that's what it is for PvE. It also applies debuffs, this and that, but that's for PvP related. I'm not going to get into that now because this isn't covering the guides. Now it's also increasing the health from your party, including yours, and it's doing some damage on impact as well. Now it's gonna do a lot of damage when you're doing AoE. If it's single target, it's fine. But regard it as a buff for your party rather than a damage for yourself. So that's everything with the build. Then back to the rubies, we have obviously stamina increase because that's what you always need on every class for heroics, and always other content as well. Now I'm calling a lot of heroics out of this because that's the main asshole dungeon content we're doing in this game, but it also applies for raids and other PvE content you can imagine, like maze and OBS and citadel raids and moss. All of that applies the same rule. It's very important to have. Then we have improved heat exchange. Increases the damage you do when in the aspect of support, which is ours, which is why our volleys deal so much damage, which is this. And also increases temperature by 60 degrees. That means that when you use this by default without this ruby, you only gain 40 cooling. 40 cooling, that means to hit 200 you need to do the ability 5 times, which is quite a lot. When you have these rubies, it's giving you 60 on top, so it gives 100. So that means only 2 global cooldowns are needed to maximize this. Now when you're lucky and you have double attack up and it procs, then you have 200 in one ability. This is something we use, or I use in PvP, but in PvE it's not as needed, so you have more control on your rotation as well. And you need these rubies also for the damage it gives, and because you can refresh your buffs faster that way. Now Barrage of Fire, as already explained, you need this to reapply your defensive buff when you're using your Burst of Mana or Reactor Blowdown. But again, we're not using Reactor Blowdown, we're using Burst of Mana for this build particular. We have proficiency increase because stats are always really good. We're grinding our day off, our asses off to get more stats from gear. Why would we leave the stats around in our rubies? So take those. Then we have Tiamotic assets. Like I said, engineer support is a natural damage build. Increases acid damage by 15%, so even developers know that and they want you to play natural damage. Damage over time dealt by your devices increases by 60%, so acid turret's damage increases. Vigor increases 9%. Very important to have vigor because vigor is the baseline of all your numbers that you're dealing. The less vigor you have, the less damage you deal, the less everything you do, and then the weaker you are. So vigor is always necessary, very important to have. Then flying fractions, as I was discussing before this, AoE dispel, as you see here, is going to apply on everything on your main target and then everything around it in a 15-yard radius, which is quite big for an AoE dispel. Second grid, we have the swiftness rubies. Now you need swiftness so that your cooldowns are less, because you support less cooldown on your crowd control, less cooldown on your turrets, less cooldown on your buffs. Everything is better with less cooldown. Now another thing is also that your destructive shots duration also is based on your swiftness. So the more swiftness you have, the faster it's going to fire. As you can see, its cast time is reduced by the value of your current swiftness bonus. So how much swiftness you have at the time of executing destructive shots, it's going to reduce the cast time of that, which is good. That means you're pushing more damage in less time, which means more DPS, damage per second. Then we have circulation, which is the ruby you need to reapply Valiance when you're using an offensive ability. And then we have Gravity Whirl, which is for our Spider Suppressor. Now what Gravity Whirl does is that with a 100% chance, and then as less rank you have, the less chance there is, With a 100% chance, every enemy within the range of Spider Suppressor will be pulled towards the spider and will be disoriented by 3 seconds. That means that when you did Spider Suppressor and you don't have these rubies, it's only going to snare, and that is when you're going to kill your party. Very important for you to have these rubies so that you apply this the disorientated effect. And then below that, as aspect of assault, which is very OP for DPS engineer, they're going to use Spider Suppressor as well with these rubies. Applies 100%, a 20% debuff on them, that they take more damage from the engineer for 6 seconds. It's amazing to combine this, so you use Spider Suppressor and then reactive destructive shots right after, so that you deal the most damage to the party as an AoE, as an engineer DPS. Very strong indeed. Then we have corrosive contents. Duration of the effects that inflict damage over time reduced by 30 seconds. I'm assuming this is 30%. GG descriptions. And the damage increased by 60%. This is more about DOTs, and the only thing we really use as a dot is the bomb. If you don't have these rubies, you'll see that the timer of acid might be longer. Now, I have this by default because that's what I used to do, but rather thinking about it now, it might be a throw away of rubies by having these two. So it might be better to not take these, as Drag Bomb is the only ability you use, and it might be better even to have a longer duration of dots, so that it ticks more, so that your determination has more chance of staying optimal. That's what I believe right now about this. I can't think of another DOT ability. No. So I wouldn't take these two rubies. I would use them for something else. What? I don't know yet. We'll see in a bit. Then we have Overload rubies. After using Reactor Blowdown or Burst of Mana, which is this ability, you will receive the Overload effect that will increase damage dealt by you and your devices by 12% for 10 seconds. But basically, you're doing this every few seconds, so you're gonna have to refresh this all the time. So you see here, every time I use this ability, here it's refreshing the buff of Overload. So 12% damage increase when you're doing this. Very good. So important when you do any of your bursts, make sure that you first do something and then blow down to get that buff, so you have the damage buff included. Very nice damage addition as a support. As you can see, chemical agents, Drag Bomb and Acid Bomb, 50% increase. Now together with these rubies, I might start to think you might need or want to use Drag Bomb for more damage. Might be possible, but then again, up to you. But it deals more damage. I would say it's good right now. Paralyzing rate, cast time decreased by 100%, so you can have it instantly ready. I would say this is necessary in case of failures or mistakes, that you can quickly crowd control the enemy if needed. Very important. Now, Destructive Shots is the AoE damage ability with a lot of damage. As you can see in the description, this has to be a bug. 2 million damage 8 times over the duration time. That is a lot of damage. Makes you invulnerable to control effects. Now this is something really useful for PvP. Yeah, makes you immune to CC, a lot of damage, AoE. This is the dream ability of every engineer. Now the cooldown is 51 seconds and you cannot reduce it with swiftness. So I believe you can't reduce it, I'm not sure. It shouldn't be able to reduce. So then we have this. Damage from Acid Bomb and Fire Bomb increased by 30%. So actually I'm pushing a lot of rubies on bombs that I'm not really using. Now this is for sure useful as a DPS, but I'm not sure for a PVE support. I suppose I took them because there was nothing really else to take for a support. Nothing useful here. Now cooldown of Shocker might be actually better to take, so you have less cooldown on your Shocker ability. I suppose that's more useful. Now there's Acetite. I've had discussions with other engineers that Acetite is important as a buff to the party as well, together with secondary reaction to increase the duration of it and the cooldown decreases. Overload is like another buff for damage on your party, but as you can see in description wise, it's adding so little to the party. I'm not sure if that's even worth using. I would recommend taking this. So then moving on to the third grid, we have the full support grid. First we go down to Mechanical Cycle. This reduces the cooldown duration of your critical mass, power barrier, and teleportation abilities, which are all the abilities you have as your class abilities. So when you use teleportation, it's going to teleport you to your furthest device away from you, always the furthest, within 85 yards from you. Can be useful to escape from AoEs and so on and forth. Then we have the second barrier, power barrier. Surrounds you with a barrier equal to 25% of your max health for 6 seconds. Now there is a ruby that enhances this power contour, increases duration of your power barrier by 50%, so that means it's going to last 9 seconds. Surrounds you and all your party members with a barrier that absorbs damage equal to 15% of your max health for 6 seconds. So that means you have a longer barrier duration, and you also get more than your party. And also the barrier heals the affected targets for 1% of their max health every half second. So that means 2% per second. A good passive healing for your whole party. Very useful when your party is taking AoE damage. You can help them that way. So when we have these, we go down. Supermassive particles. Your critical mass duration increases by 50%. Increases parties members damage dealt by 15% for 4 seconds. Now this is very precise, 4 seconds. This isn't long, so it's really good to coordinate this with your party when they're bursting, but it's increasing damage by a lot when you have this off on the right time. Now for you, it's way longer, so it's really useful for you. It's amazing, about 25% for about 20 seconds. It's really, really long. Very strong ability. Yeah. Then we have Encouraging Surge, as I explained, for courage to apply the anti-CC buff. And then we have Invigorating Surge, which I always use for a Bloodlust buff. Now this Invigorating Surge is going to give the buff so that all incoming healing in your party is increased by 100%. Now I have this by default, but I honestly... there's still this doubt that I didn't manage to test whether Bloodlust is affected by this or not. So the question is that when we use this ability, does the Bloodlust that the party uses to heal up is doubled for those 5 seconds, or does it not work? If somebody can point it out in the comments, would be great. I believe I still have it because I'm not sure, so it's better to have that not. But if it turns out that it doesn't, then that's another 2 rubies free to use for something else, and at this point I really wouldn't know where to put them as an engineer support. You don't really need that many rubies. Then we go here. So Gravity Anomaly was for your power field to apply the defense effect of 40% for 12 seconds. Another good thing is that you receive 1 stack of Cannonade every second while your power field generator is active. Cannonade effect increases damage dealt by volleys by X amount of percentage, so as you are in this barrier, you see this buff here that you gain is Cannonade, which is buffing your shots damage basically. As you can see, you're doing double damage. That means that it's giving a bonus damage on top of this shot, which is pretty nice. Progressive defense is a passive. Incoming damage is reduced by 21%. Very good to have as a support. You're basically really tanky that way. Same for DPS engineer, you're a tanky DPS. Then we have Steel Trap. Now Steel Trap is the one that we used here. This is very useful to have when you're pulling packs together as a support, so that you can group up packs quicker, and you can use power fields right after that on them to slow them all down. And really great to combine with destructive shots as well, so you have all of them in your AoE ranges. Great thing about this is that this is on your global cooldown. Steel Trap is not, so you can combine it really quickly after each other. Now you need these rubies for it to pull everything together. Let me see here. This is the same. Oh yeah, this is the ability. Sorry, I thought there was an ability here. So you need this ruby, so you have Steel Trap. Now rank 3 for last cooldown, which is always advised to have as support. And then you have this ruby Vacuum Trap, which pulls everything together to the Steel Trap target, which is important to have, like I just said. Then we're going to Heat Signature. I told you already you can drop this. This is useless as a support engineer, so please do not take this ruby. At least this way, by making guides for you guys, I'm also still learning new things. Then we have increased energy absorption. Lifetime of attacking devices increased by 40%. So your devices last longer that way. That means for your acid turrets, that probably means for your No, it says attacking devices. Yeah, attacking devices, so not your other devices. So as the turrets last longer that way. I saw you can stack up to 3 turrets at a whole time, and there is a small overlap where there are 4 turrets until the next one dies. As you can see here, 3 turrets, and then you see the timer here expired. You'll have 3 turrets up all the time, and then you have a small overlap of 4 turrets at some point. Now, good to know is that the reload also resets the cooldown, so you can also use it as a burst when you're combining it. Small burst, that's it. Reload ability, as I said here, reloads all control systems, instantly resetting the cooldowns of all mechanisms. So that's all the devices you have. Qualified mechanic, maximum number of simultaneous operational devices increases by 4. Now I did some testing with this and I don't really see a point going more than 4. I suppose it's the maximum amount of devices you can use of the same type. So acid turrets are one type, power field are one type, paramedical, medical emergency are one type, and so on and forth. So all of them, basically those rubies aren't really necessary. You just go this way anyway for reload. Now you can take deer walls to reapply bloodthirst when you're doing power field, but like I said, if you're already using it often enough with burst of mana, it's not really necessary at all. Then we have top level engineer. Damage of attacking devices increases by 25%, which is really good for your attacking devices. This is also probably the reason why they are so high on your damage meter to begin with. Then you have here firing line rubies for your light turret firing speed increasing based on your swiftness. This is for this one. Now I tested this and it wasn't as good as acid turrets. Now it does the same damage as the acid turrets when you have a lot of swiftness and when you have those rubies, but it's physical damage, not natural, so they won't benefit from your natural damage stat, and it's not an AoE. Acid turret is AoE, so that's where the difference maker is. Going down to extraction is really necessary for your medical emergency. Now when you drop medical emergency, your extraction is going to purify everything that's within the range of 40 yards, 100%. It's going to purify everything. After that, every second it has a 50% chance to remove, to purify whatever your allies have. Applying one of the following effects instead: treachery. So when it purifies something, it apparently gives treachery, might, blood, bravery, protection, or valiance. Now I've never really noticed this, so I'm assuming as long as you have valiance active, it is overriding the effect here. Just very important to have because it's purifying. And as you can see, extraction dispels one random negative effect every 3 seconds. So I'm assuming every 3 seconds it's 100% to remove something, and in between those 3 seconds it's a 50% chance to remove something. Simply said, very necessary. We always use it, never failed on us before, but it is still an RNG ability. And with that, I see I've covered all the rubies that we take. Now most of the other stuff is self-explanatory why we don't take it, because the aspect of assault is there. I'll quickly say sterilization to remove more buffs from your enemies with one single concentrate. This isn't necessary for PVE, it is really necessary for PvP, so you might want to take it through in PvP. Acid mixture might be useful, more damage with this, but then again, I'm not really using it because I'm not spamming it that much unless certain monsters. So then over to gameplay. You probably have heard a lot about gameplay already while I explain the build, but then gameplay wise, it's important to know that basically you always start with your buffs active. So you always pop these. I have them on my mouse button so I can pop them all the time. There's people macroing them. If that works for you, then please do that as long as the job gets done. But I'm quite against macros myself, so I'm not using these. So you spam these always. As you can see, you have these durations going on. As long as you have these durations, it's going to refresh your Valiance and Bloodthirst when you use Burst of Mana. I am always spamming my turrets together with whatever I'm using. That way, I'm always sure that I'm proccing my turrets the moment they have cooldown, so that that's the maximum damage gain I get from my turrets. Then, as we evolve further into combat, You also want to do a burst at the beginning. Usually go with Master Plan first, and then Critical Mass right after that for destructive shots, so that you're using the destructive shots while you have your buffs active. And then, as I said, Bomb right after to reapply the Valence effect. Now, another good thing is that while you're doing all of this, you can just focus on doing as many toxic volleys as possible. So you're pushing your damage as much as you can, but as you can see, the turrets are overtaking in damage. So the turrets are doing a lot of damage compared to yours. Now, developers intended this because that way you as an engineer can focus on interrupting castings from your enemy. You can focus on buffing and supporting your party, while still maintaining quite enough DPS so that you can heal up yourself with Bloodlust, because yes, the damage your turrets deal are adding Bloodthirst to you, not to themselves, because the turrets are immune. They can't take damage. That means they can't also heal up. So a good thing is that they made it so that the damage they deal are yours. The damage they deal heals you as well. To push more damage as well, and also add defense, always drop power field to get the cannonade effects. And that's pretty much it. That's like most of the basic gameplay of Engineer. I don't know how it's so scary for a lot of people, but that is how you just simply play it. Now, of course, there are exceptions on when to use CCs and when to use this and that. But you'll see that yourself, that when you basically always see a monster casting, you might want to interrupt it. Now, to interrupt, you have quite some abilities. You have the Shocker ability, which applies a stun for 2 seconds instantly, and it's interrupted. I'm using Firecracker as my racial because it CCs up to 3 enemies in a 20-yard radius. Now, the only downtime to this is that it has a travel time. That means you might get late at some point when you're CCing. There are different racials. War Mystery, there's Adrenaline and Master Plan. I highly recommend try Master Plan because it's buffing every single base stat by 70. So 70 Prof, 70 Dieter, 70 Bruta for 10 seconds. Really good for bursting. So don't use Adrenaline. So then we have our racial abilities quickly to find. We have Evil Genius. Applies torture effect to all your party members and immune effect to all enemies. I don't use this because it's very RNG. I don't want to rely on RNG. I want to know what I'm doing, so I wouldn't recommend this. Firecracker is the one I'm going with. Flash Charge is the competitor there. The Flash Charge gives a disorient effect to all enemies within 20 yards range in front of you. So you have to imagine that there's a frontal cone in front of you, 20 yards, and then everything of that gets CC'd. Obviously that's better than the Firecracker because it's faster, it's instantly when you use the ability, but you might miss it more often than Firecracker because you don't really see the cone you have. It's only gonna work in front of you, and it's also confusing when you're moving a lot. As you can see, when I'm turning away that way, but when I'm attacking, my character turns that way. Also the cone turns that way. So it's tricky when you're using the ability and you turn away on that point, you might miss it, and that's a racial missed. And I'd rather have it miss than that I have a small delay on my CCs that I'm for sure that they will hit. Yeah, so that's it. That's why I'm picking Firecracker over Flash Charge. Now the other racials are not as good either. But that's all for racials. Yeah. So there's only 3 racials. There might be another one, but I missed it. But that's the most important one to have. Firecracker is what I'm always using. Magic Injection. Heals an ally by so much and then grants them the Might effect. Now Might is power, so you don't want to use this at all, and it's a small heal, which again, quite useless when you have Bloodlust for your party to heal. So that's that. Everything else is that. So that's for racials. Not much else to say. So other CCs you have is Spider Suppressor, like I said, amazing AoE CC. You have your Rattler, which is also CC on impact, but I wouldn't use this as a CC at all. Like I said, it's more like a buff. And that's about everything for CCs. Now know that Spider Suppressor and the Shocker are your most CCs. Now you can also use Paralyzing Ray as an interruption because it's applying long CC, right? So when you see something casting, you can also use this to interrupt it. Now it's tricky when the mob is below 90%, because as you can see here, if the target has less than 90% of health left, any incoming damage will remove the effect. Now it happens that you might see a mob that's below 90% using casting. You have Spider Suppressor and Shocker on cooldown, you might want to use Paralyzing Ray. There's a chance between it working or not, depending on how often that monster gets attacked at the same time, because the game needs to pick up that you long CC'd that monster in order for it to interrupt the ability of the monster was doing. If the party you're playing with attacks that same monster at the same time that you're doing that CC, I'm gonna say 90% of the time it's not going to interrupt. There is a chance, but it's not going to be guaranteed. So that's something to know as well. Then stats, very important to have stats. I have presets here. Let me see my engineer, PVE, support, and then I have damage types for the heroics. Let's say elemental, because that's what we usually go with. And I'm out of insignias. Quickly getting insignias. So when we're back with our insignias, I'll show you the stats. So I'm gonna pick elemental because that's what the most common damage type will be when you're doing heroics. That and together with physical. So once the stats are done, no message. Let's do it again. Work done. There we go. So as you can see, I have my stats set up so that my determination gets buffed when I use Valiance, which is what you always want to have for PvE at this time being. Everything else as close to it as possible, because when I'm doing damage, then I am using proficiency and brutality to buff the other things. So everything is kind of well balanced, and then Valiance is doing that big push on your most important DPS stat. Now for swiftness I have 278. Now I'm gonna say you want to get 260 minimum, because your victory cross is going to add another 40 to that swiftness when you're having when you're doing attacks. As you can see here, it's going up by 5 per attack, and then it's gonna max up. It's going to give a total of 40 basically, and then it stops giving. So you're going to pass that 300 mark, which is going to give your destructive shots that last needed speed to quickly cast. So then obviously natural damage is very important. Now I have a very good ratio here, 247. Now the soft cap of damage types is 250, so this is really good, as you can see that I have. Try to go to 50 as well. Try to go anything below that, but don't go above 251. That's already where you're gonna see a lot of diminishing damage, and I wouldn't recommend going above 250. That is damage attacks, that's everything for damage. So natural damage, swiftness, and base stats equal. Your Valiance has to buff your determination, so determination has to be the highest stats, excluding buffs. So it's not going to calculate the buffs you have at the time active, only the base. You can see it says effect bonus 40, effect bonus 50. You can simply math that out of the stat that you have and see how much you have that way. The defensive stats, I always have 300 caution. Now I have 400 because it gives me 100 extra from today's order buffs, which is very bad because I didn't vote on that, but very well. 300 caution is the sweet spot you want to have for PvE and PvP. Elemental protection, because my preset is for elemental. Now depending on the boss you want to fight, you can switch to physical, and then you run 250 physical protection. Very important to have when you're doing heroics, so you can quickly switch your stats around, and then concentration around 200 seem to be fine for me. I can build my barrier fast enough, and it's going to protect me from most of the attacks I take. And that's everything for stats. That's all I can tell you. If anything, more questions about supporting engineer, if you have any more suggestions that you can say that I could have done better, please spit them out on the comments. I'd love to learn more about it. As you can see, I'm still learning when I make these guides after playing engineer for so long. So that's all I can do. I thank you guys for watching. Give it a like if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more content about Allods Online or about what I'm making for Allods Online. And I'll see you guys on the next guide or video. See you guys. Bye.